Hi, everybody. I'm Kari Simpson. This is Culture Guard, and we are continuing with part 3 of a story that we will visit from time to time after this show. But it's a show and segments that are looking into the courts. First of all, the role of the courts in our democracy. Are the courts out of control in our democracy? We have issues of judicial activism. We have concerns being raised about the corruption of the courts. We have concerns about whether or not there's any way to hold judges accountable and whether or not Canadians can have confidence in those processes. Joining me online from Ontario is lawyer Christopher Taucar. Christopher is a lawyer who is increasingly concerned about what's happening in the courts. He is an individual whose integrity demands that he speak out on these issues. He's been party to a particular case that we detailed in segment 2. We're going to continue with in this segment, a case that he was very involved with, a case that when I read all the details, didn't sound too complicated to me and should have just been a slam dunk in the courts, but certainly did not play out that way. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us again here on Culture Guard.
My pleasure to be here.
Now, we ended last week's story with what had transpired in the courts and everything from judges knowing other judges' spouses who were involved in the initial complaint at the University of Ontario, to problems with how they dealt with the matter before them in a matter that wasn't complicated. And you also threw in, which I hadn't paid too much attention to, some of the challenges from the administrative end of the courts, not getting decisions in a timely manner, not clerks backdating information when you're trying to appeal up to the Supreme Court. Revelations that just keep increasing my concern and I guess just adamant that there's problems in our court that need to be addressed. But you're not stopping there. You are not to be deterred, and I congratulate you on that. You found the conduct of the 3 judges so egregious in this matter that you've made a complaint to the Canadian Judicial Council. Now, you've done 3 specific complaints. Can you again review what you've made as far as your complaint to this body that you're hoping will look at the conduct of these judges and say, this was wrong?
Right. So what the basic complaint is, the judicial misconduct of deliberately undermining the rule of law, and furthermore to protect the judge's spouse by avoiding judicial review of a decision or award which couldn't survive under such review. And so really there's 3 parts to it. There's a 4th one that we can talk about with respect to a different matter with respect to Judge Matlow when he made anti-Christian biased comments in a different decision. But we'll just deal with the complaint against the 3 judges. So on the one hand, they refused judicial review of this university's decision on a matter of harassment and discrimination because they said you have one person making findings of fact rather than 3 under the collective agreement. So it's no longer really a public decision anymore, even though the legislation says the university has a public duty with respect to these matters. And then so the other part is, so they weren't doing their job. They were abusing their office or acting in an incompetent manner. So on the other hand, if it is a public decision, if it's not a public decision, we said 2 out of 3 grounds of review it's a private decision, so it's reviewable under common law and arbitration.
Okay.
And we say because they didn't even, they completely ignored those 2 grounds, they were acting in bad faith.
Okay. And the 3rd one is particularly concerning to me, especially after the revelations that you made on last week's show, and that deals with the false and defamatory comments found in their decision making. Well,
that's right. And what was really funny about it was this stuff, every single point that they mentioned was all false. They seemed to just make it up, and it seemed that the purpose, because of those facts, because they were false, the purpose, all I can conclude is that they were just wanting to impose costs on the applicant and her lawyer, being me, and to prejudice her ability to appeal. Well, if you're a judge sitting on appeal and you have these judges saying that these people are bad, who are you going to believe?
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's not limited to your case. I mean, this is where we start having to look when judges start using their position on the bench to malign and defame individuals. I would suggest that that is a complete improper use of the bench, and their conduct should be chargeable. And let's hope the Canadian Judicial Council also sees that. And, those matters need to be bolstered, because I have seen them in other matters that are equally concerning, that when these stories of fiction are created, then not at the next level, you have to not undo the problems that you're appealing about, but you have to undo a whole new set of problems. And that's certainly not the position or what the court should be acting. Now, in the first segment, we talked a little bit about the role of the Canadian Judicial Council. And basically, this is judges making judgment on other judges. There's been very few successful complaints processed through the Canadian Judicial Council, and I think most people who have learned and studied the structure of the council remain a bit hesitant on whether or not they are truly unbiased in their approach to these cases. I think there's only been 6 or 7 cases processed of late through them. Now, the level of complaints represent far more than those 6 or 7, decided upon. Now, in your case, you raised in the first segment a very interesting argument, because typically the Canadian Judicial Council will only hear matters relevant to the conduct of a judge, not so much on their decision. But in your argument, you have crafted a very interesting argument, one that has me intrigued, and I would like you to explain that to our audience, because I think it's, number one, I think it's brilliant, but I also think it's extraordinarily relevant to what's happening in these decisions and in law in general in Canada. And you tell our viewers what you're doing with this so you can work it into the purview of the Canadian Judicial Council.
Right. So, as I said, undermining the rule of law and things of that sort, that should be a ground in itself. But I also said in the alternative that there are cases to suggest that these judges didn't even believe what they had written was the law, because in a case involved 1 year later, involving exactly the University of Western Ontario, involving a harassment case, Judge Matlow and Judge Swinton, who are sitting on it, never referred to a lot of the factors that Judge Matlow was using to apply to my client to deny her judicial review.
Now, Judge Matlow, and I want to digress a little bit here, because I want to come back to the honest belief argument. But let's talk a little bit on 2 fronts. Number one, you have a petition that you've put together, and we will be posting on our website. And this deals with the justices involved in this matter, Justice Matlow, Kent, and Aston from the bench. And what it is you're asking people support your complaint to the Canadian Judicial Council that they engaged in judicial misconduct of deliberately undermining the rule of law. And you go down and you list the various items of complaint here, making unwarranted, false, and made-up attacks pertaining to the applicant and her lawyer. These are serious charges, but when you look at the details of this case, they are legitimate and they are concerning to me as a Canadian. So we have the petition here. Now, this is an unusual step for a lawyer to take, to create a petition to the Canadian Judicial Council. Are we at a point in this civil democracy where we have to mobilize people now to express to the courts what the reasonable-minded civic Canadian thinks about these issues?
Well, there's 2 points to that. The first is, the short answer is yes. If judges know that people are watching, they're going to take notice of this. The second point is, actually, under the proceedings, these kind of petitions are actually relevant. If judges see that people are saying, well, these judges have done this, and we don't have confidence in them, they should be removed. This is good evidence to have before the Canadian Judicial Council, we can't afford to let up this kind of evidence. We've got to be able to use it.
Okay, now more disconcerting to me, in addition to the facts that are detailed in your case, is concerning Justice Matlow. Now, this is the same judge that recently made comments, and I want you to address those comments. This involved issues involving pro-life, obviously then are Christian in nature. And I want to expressly state this. I think there is growing concern among Canadians that Christian bashing, whether it be in the media or in the courts, is becoming an acceptable form of violence, and whether that violence is demonstrated through words or the lack of access to justice or the destruction of churches or threats to different people because they're Christians. These are increasing activities, and one of the culprits in this seems to be the court. Now, Justice Matlow has found himself front and center in one of these controversies. Can you give our audience a little bit of background about what he did?
Sure. So what's happening in the Bedford decision, that's the prostitution case.
Okay, so this is an important Canadian case that is before Canadians involving serious issues affecting communities. And what did he do?
So what happens was you had three different groups. You had Real Women, who I don't even think are a Christian group. You had Christian Legal Fellowship, and you had the Catholic Civil Rights League. And they intervene just like feminists do and just like gay activists do. They intervene in charter cases. Mm-hmm. And they routinely get permission to intervene. So what Judge Matlow did is he refused them. And then,
okay, so let's get this straight. So the prostitution case is making it before the court. Justice Matlow is assigned to preside over this case.
But what these groups have to do, when you intervene, you have to ask permission from the court to intervene. So this is not the hearing of the case.
Okay, so he was just he was assigned to preside over the applications to intervene into this case.
That's right.
Okay.
And these are pretty, these groups get them all the time. And in 3 paragraphs of his decision, 18, 22, and 23, what he said was apparently to him, arguments made by Christian Canadians are not legal arguments fitting for a court to consider. Such arguments are disruptive, and if courts allow Christians to make arguments which may reflect Christian values, it would appear that courts are acting corruptly by providing Christians with a platform to advance their principles, which he thinks are only held by small segments of the Canadian society. And I put in brackets, it seems the way his tone was that they're a radical fringe.
Well, now, okay, so somehow then everybody else has the right, because last time I read the Charter of Rights, it continually uses that word everyone. Last time I read the Charter, there was protection for religious beliefs, conscience, and a few other important things. So somehow Justice Matlow believes that everybody's entitled to those rights except Christians?
Well, I just set out what he said. I don't know what's in Judge Matlow's mind, but what I do know from what we've said is what reasonable people can conclude. He acted upon Christian bigotry. It's not, even if a judge is bigoted and biased, that's one thing, but when they actually act upon it to deny rights or intervention rights to other people based on their religious background or their views, that's quite another thing.
Well, that's improper use of their position on the bench. That should be one of the most serious offenses looked at for a judge to commit against the people that he is there to serve. And judges are there to serve everyone, Justice Matlow. Now, Justice Matlow also sat on your case. Was there any evidence before your case then of Christianity or anything like that would sort of ignite this bigotry?
No, this was the reason I didn't make this complaint earlier, because I'd heard about it, and I don't like judges denying rights or denying interventions to anybody on their ground. So I knew about this case before. I didn't want to make the complaint because I was scared that it would prejudice my client's case in this matter, her harassment complaint and her appeals. So once she was denied her legal rights, and the rule of law. I just joined these complaints together.
Now, there was another judge in the anti-abortion case or the protesting case, and the judge's name escapes me. Are you familiar with that case?
Anti-abortion case. There's a number of cases. I'm not 100% sure which one you're thinking of.
Well, this one involved Mary Wagner, from my recollection, where the judge got into a lively exchange with one of her supporters where he basically made some anti-Christian comments about what was going on. And there have been other cases that have been brought to our attention where there seems to be a anti-Christian bias that can be clearly demonstrated in matters involving the courts. Is this an area that people should be concerned about and say, wait a minute, this is not acceptable for our judges to be offering this kind of bias in their decision making?
Oh, I think you might be thinking about, I don't want to comment on this one because somebody's asked me to look at it and perhaps to make a complaint, retain me to make a complaint on that one. But I think that's, your God is wrong.
That would be the case.
And so I don't want to talk about that one too much, but if you take a look at Judge Matlow's comments, they convey both untruthfulness and reviling.
Yes.
If Christians are full members of society, they rightly reject the sort of exclusion that would banish them from the courts. So this kind of position would establish two classes of people, those who may present arguments in court and Christians. So this kind of view conflicts with freedom of religion and discrimination on the basis of religion too. So anytime, as I said, any judge through personal bias wants to exclude the rights of any group or any individual for reasons that are not part of the law, this really gives me a lot of concern.
Christopher Taucar, thank you so much for your time and your work. Of course, my antennas are up on your the possibilities of a client retaining your services in informing the complaint against Your God is Wrong case. And I certainly hope you'll keep us posted on that. And if that complaint is filed, that we'll be talking again in the very near future.
Right. Well, I'd be happy to be on again.
And we will keep up to date with what's happening, what transpires through this case, because I think it's a great educational opportunity to see how this process works. Just in closing here, Christopher, the complaint was made when to the Canadian Judicial Council?
It was dated May 12th, and it was sent by express post on that day. So I believe it was received a day later.
And how long do these complaints typically take? Is there a time frame that they have to operate in, or is it basically open-ended?
I'm not sure. They don't really give a timetable, but it seems that at the first stage, when you have a smaller group of judges or outsiders investigating, it could take about 6 months, and then after that, if they go to full hearing, then you get a lot of lawyers involved in full-scale hearings and things of that sort. So it could take another 6 months or a year.
So we'll have a long-term ongoing relationship. Is that it? I also want to remind people on our website will be the petitions. There's two petitions. One involving the matter involving Mr. Taucar's client, how judges just kind of threw to the wind proper protocols and procedures. The other involving Justice Matlow for his anti-Christian, what appears to be bigotry that has no place on the bench. And every Canadian, regardless of your views, your beliefs, should be outraged that this kind of adjudication is happening in Canada. I'm Kari Simpson. This is Culture Guard. Thanks again, Christopher, for joining us. We will be in touch again.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.